I can defend him, said the poor 8-year-old girl after the lawyer abandoned the young millionaire. Hi, my beautiful family. I have missed you all. Missed all the experiences we've had together. It's been a rough ride as we're currently battling some technical issues, but trust me, we're getting everything back and running. So stick around. I need your support now more than ever. Thank you for sticking around with me. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The courtroom air crackled with his ruin, the flashes of cameras like vultures descending. As his lawyer walked away, abandoning him to his fate, a small, clear voice pierced the silence from the back of the room. Wait, I can defend him. The silence in Julian Croft's penthouse was a physical thing. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a library or the hushed reverence of a cathedral. It was the sterile, pressurized silence of a tomb. It filled the vast, open spaces between the chrome and glass furniture, clung to the million-dollar paintings on the stark white walls, and pooled in the corners of the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic, godlike view of the sprawling city below. From up here, 60 floors above the grit and the noise, the cars were metallic insects and the people were non-existent. It was a perspective Julian had once cultivated, once cherished. Now it just made him feel remote, disconnected from the very world that was about to devour him. He stood before the window, a glass of water in his hand, the condensation beating and dripping onto the polished marble floor. He didn't notice. His gaze was fixed on the distant, monolithic structure of the city courthouse, a granite beast that squatted in the heart of the metropolis, waiting for him. Tomorrow, in less than 24 hours, he would be back inside it, sitting at a polished table, trying to project an aura of calm confidence he hadn't felt in months. He was wearing a tailored silk robe, but the fabric felt abrasive against his skin. Everything felt wrong. The air was too cold, the light too bright. He took a sip of water, and it tasted like ash. His stomach was a tight, writhing knot of acid and anxiety. Sleep had become a stranger, a luxury he could no longer afford. For the past 2 nights he had tried, in his $1,000 sheets, on a mattress engineered for perfect rest, but his mind was a racetrack of horrors. The prosecutor's sneering face, the jury's skeptical eyes, the damning headlines that painted him as a monster of corporate greed. Boy wonder billionaire accused of arson fraud. Croft Enterprises in flames. An inside job? A soft chime echoed through the penthouse. His assistant, Maria, speaking through the intercom. Her voice was, as always, meticulously professional, yet tinged with a careful, almost clinical pity he'd come to despise. Mr. Croft? Mr. Vance is on the line for you. He says it's important. Julian's jaw tightened. Arthur Vance, his lawyer. The man who cost more per hour than most people made in a month. The man whose reputation for winning unwinnable cases was legendary. The man who was supposed to be his silver bullet. Put him through, Julian said, his voice a low rasp. He walked over to the large, minimalist desk and pressed the speakerphone button. The silence was instantly replaced by Arthur's smooth, baritone voice. A voice that dripped with authority and expensive scotch. Julian, just wanted to touch base before tomorrow. I've reviewed the prosecution's latest disclosure. It's formidable. Formidable, Julian repeated, the word leaving a bitter taste. You're paid to handle formidable, Arthur. And I will, Arthur said, though for the first time, a hairline crack appeared in his usual ironclad confidence. But I need you to be prepared. This new evidence, the encrypted server logs, it's going to be a tough punch to roll with. The jury will see it as a smoking gun. It's fabricated, Julian said, the words coming out with a familiar, weary frustration. He had said it 1,000 times to the police, to his board, to Arthur. The server was hacked. The data was planted. Someone framed me. A theory, Julian. A compelling one, but a theory nonetheless. What we lack is proof. What they have is data. In a courtroom, data beats theory 9 times out of 10. There was a pause. Julian could hear the faint clink of ice in a glass. Arthur was already drinking. I need you to manage your expectations for tomorrow. We're going to take a hit. The key is to weather it and come back fighting. No outbursts. No emotion. You are made of stone. Understood? Stone, Julian echoed, looking at his reflection in the dark glass of the window. He saw a pale, haunted man of 29 who looked 40. The tailored robe hung on a frame that had lost 15 pounds. His eyes, once sharp and ambitious, were hollowed out, shadowed with a toxic mixture of fury and fear. Understood, Arthur. Good. Get some rest. Tomorrow we go to war. The line clicked dead, and the oppressive silence rushed back in, more menacing than before. War. It felt more like a public execution. He sank into his leather chair, the cool material doing nothing to soothe the fire under his skin. He trusted Arthur. He had to. He'd built his empire on the principle of hiring the best and trusting their expertise. But as he sat there, alone in his glass castle in the sky, a terrifying thought, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, pierced through his carefully constructed defenses. What if the best wasn't good enough? 59 floors below, and a world away, the silence in Lily's apartment was of a different kind. It was a warm, lived-in quiet, layered with the gentle hum of an old refrigerator, the faint rhythmic ticking of a plastic cat clock on the wall, and the soft, raspy breathing of her grandmother, Elena, who was asleep in her armchair. The air smelled of lavender-scented laundry soap and the faint, sweet aroma of yesterday's cinnamon toast. 8-year-old Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, the worn, floral-patterned rug soft beneath her. The television was on, but the volume was turned down so low it was just a murmur. In front of her was a scattered arsenal of colored pencils, some new and sharp, most worn down to pathetic, chewed-on stubs, and a piece of paper. It wasn't fancy art paper, but the back of a utility bill her grandma had given her. Lily didn't mind. A blank space was a blank space. She wasn't drawing a princess or a pony. She was drawing a face. A man's face. She'd been drawing it all week, ever since she first saw him on the evening news. The news lady had used big, scary words like embezzlement and corporate malfeasance. But Lily hadn't paid attention to the words. She had looked at the man's eyes. Even on their small, flickering television screen, she could see it. He was standing outside a big stone building, surrounded by people shouting and pushing cameras in his face. He was wearing a fancy suit, but his shoulders were slumped. And his eyes, they looked like the eyes of the stray dog she'd seen hiding under a car during a thunderstorm last month. Lost. Scared. And so alone. Hi family, have you subscribed? Please do. Thanks. The news called him the young millionaire. To Lily, he was just the sad rich man. Grandma Elena always said that being rich didn't stop you from being sad. Sometimes she'd say, it was the fanciest cages that were the loneliest. Her pencil, a serious-looking gray, moved carefully, trying to capture the downward turn of his mouth. She'd given him a name in her head, Mr. Croft. It sounded strong, like a hero in a book, which made the sadness in his eyes seem even more out of place. What are you drawing there, Mija? Lily looked up. Her grandma was awake, her kind, wrinkled face soft in the dim light of the lamp. She was looking at Lily's drawing with gentle curiosity. It's him, Grandma, Lily whispered, pointing the nub of her pencil at the muted television screen, where a picture of Julian Croft was frozen. The sad man. Elena sighed a soft, weary sound. She reached over and brushed a stray strand of dark hair from Lily's forehead. Ah yes, the whole world has an opinion about that one. They say he did a terrible thing. Lily shook her head, her brow furrowed with the absolute certainty only a child can possess. No, she said, her voice firm. He didn't do it. Elena smiled a little sadly. And how can you be so sure, my little dove? His eyes, Lily said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. She held up her drawing. It was clumsy, the proportions all wrong, but she had, with an uncanny intuition, perfectly captured the deep, hollow ache in Julian Croft's gaze. They don't look like lying eyes, Grandma. They look like crying eyes. But he's trying to hold the tears and so no one sees. Elena's smile faded, replaced by a look of profound tenderness. She looked from the drawing to the face on the screen, and for a moment, she tried to see what her granddaughter saw. Not a criminal, not a millionaire, but just a soul in pain. You have a good heart, Lily, Elena said softly. It sees things others don't. She glanced at the clock. Come, it's late. Time for bed. He has a big day tomorrow, I think. Lily nodded, carefully gathering her pencils and placing them back in their worn cardboard box. She folded her drawing of the sad man with great care and tucked it into the pocket of her pajamas. As her grandma led her to her small bed in the corner of the living room, Lily looked back at the television. Mr. Croft was still there, his image a silent testament to a life in crisis. A strange feeling settled in Lily's chest. It wasn't just pity. It was something stronger. A fierce, protective urge. It was the same feeling she got when a bigger kid at the park tried to push a smaller one off the swing. It was a feeling of injustice. "Grandma," she whispered, as she was tucked under the thin but warm blanket. "Yes, Mija? Do you think he has anyone to hold his hand tomorrow?" Elena paused, her hand resting on Lily's head. The question was so simple, so pure, it broke her heart a little. "I hope so, my love. I truly do." But as Lily closed her eyes, she had a sinking feeling that he didn't. And in the quiet darkness of her small corner of the world, a silent, impossible promise began to form in her 8-year-old heart. It's clear that both Julian and Lily feel a profound sense of isolation, just in vastly different worlds. Have you ever felt that an outsider understood your situation better than those closest to you? Let us know in the comments below. The first slivers of dawn crept over the city, casting long, skeletal shadows across Julian's penthouse floor. He hadn't slept. He'd merely existed, watching the city lights blink out one by one, replaced by the unforgiving gray of a new day. He showered, the scalding water a temporary, stinging distraction. He stood before his walk-in closet, a cavernous space lined with dozens of bespoke suits, each a piece of armor for a different battle in the corporate world. Today, he needed the most formidable armor he possessed. He chose a charcoal gray suit, impeccably tailored, paired with a crisp white shirt and a muted dark blue tie. The movements were automatic, rehearsed. He fastened the cufflinks, small platinum knots, and his fingers fumbled, the cool metal slipping. He tried again, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. He finally secured it, his knuckles white from the effort. He looked in the mirror. The suit fit perfectly, a shell of power and control. But the man inside it was a fraud. The eyes staring back at him were wide with a silent, primal scream. Maria had a light breakfast waiting for him on the dining table. Avocado toast, fresh fruit, black coffee. The kind of healthy, energizing meal a man on top of his game would eat. He ignored it, walking straight to the coffee pot and pouring a cup. The hot ceramic was a small, grounding comfort in his hand. "Mr. Croft," Maria said, her voice soft. She stood by the kitchen entrance, wringing her hands slightly. "There's a crowd already. Downstairs. The media." "I expected as much," he said, not looking at her. "Your security team has the route planned. Straight from the private garage to the courthouse entrance. It will be intense." She hesitated. "Julian, is there anything you need?" The use of his first name was a breach of her usual protocol. A small, desperate attempt at connection. For a fleeting second, he wanted to turn to her, to let the mask crack, to say, "I'm terrified. I think I'm going to lose everything." But the impulse was immediately crushed by a lifetime of conditioning. Vulnerability was weakness. Weakness was death. "I need you to call Arthur," he said, his voice flat and cold. "Tell him I'm on my way." He saw the hurt flicker in her eyes before she masked it with professionalism. "Of course, Mr. Croft." He drained his coffee, placed the mug down with a sharp clink, and walked towards the elevator, the perfect image of a man in control. The elevator descended in silence, a smooth, swift drop that mirrored the plummeting of his life. The chaos in the underground garage was a prelude. As the armored town car sped up the ramp and into the street, the world exploded. Flashes of light strobed against the tinted windows, a frantic, blinding assault. The muffled shouts of reporters sounded like the baying of a mob. He kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. Arthur was waiting on the courthouse steps, a grim-faced general surveying the battlefield. When the car door opened, the noise hit Julian like a physical blow. "Mr. Croft, is it true you're planning to flee the country? What do you say to the employees who lost their jobs? Did you set the fire yourself, Julian?" The questions were barbs, hooks, tearing at his composure. Arthur grabbed his arm, a firm, grounding pressure. "Don't look at them. Don't speak. Straight ahead. Eyes on the door," he commanded, his voice a low growl in Julian's ear. Julian obeyed, his legs moving stiffly. He felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on him, burning with contempt, with morbid curiosity. He felt like a specimen under a microscope, every flicker of an eyelash, every tightening of his jaw, being analyzed and judged. He was no longer a person. He was a story, a villain. And in that moment, flanked by security and his high-priced lawyer, surrounded by the cacophony of his own ruin, he had never felt more profoundly, terrifyingly alone. The massive bronze doors of the courthouse loomed before him, like the gates to the underworld. In Lily's apartment, the morning light was gentle, filtered through the slightly dusty blinds and painting soft yellow stripes across the floor. Lily was already dressed, not for school, but in her best jeans and a pink sweater with a picture of a smiling cat on it. She hadn't been able to think about schoolwork. Her mind was full of sad eyes and courtroom doors. She sat at the small kitchen table, pushing a piece of toast around her plate. Elena was packing a small tote bag with a water bottle, a paperback novel, and a folder of medical forms. She had her bi-monthly checkup at the City Health Clinic, a drab, bureaucratic building that happened to be only 2 blocks away from the main courthouse. "You're quiet this morning, Mija," Elena said, watching her granddaughter. "I'm thinking," Lily replied. "About your sad man?" Lily nodded, her expression serious. "He's going in there today. I saw it on the news." She looked up at her grandmother, her brown eyes wide and earnest. "Grandma, can I come with you?" "To your appointment." Elena paused, her hand hovering over the bag. She knew exactly why Lily wanted to come. It wasn't to sit in a stuffy clinic waiting room. "Lily, that place, the courthouse, it's not a good place for a little girl. It will be very crowded and loud." "I'll be good," Lily promised, her voice rising with urgency. "I'll hold your hand the whole time. I want to see. For myself." Elena looked at her granddaughter's determined face. There was a fire in there, a conviction that went beyond simple childhood curiosity. It was that same quality that made Lily stand up to bullies in the playground, that made her try to fix the leg of a broken toy soldier with tape and glue until it could stand again. It was empathy, fierce and pure. How could she say no to that? "All right," she sighed, a small smile touching her lips. "But you stay right by my side. And we are not going there to gawk. We are just walking past on our way to my appointment." "Understood." "Understood," Lily chirped, her face breaking into a relieved smile. She jumped up from the table, ran to her bed, and retrieved the folded-up drawing from under her pillow. She carefully smoothed it out and then folded it again, tucking it securely into the pocket of her jeans. It felt important, like a secret weapon or a lucky charm. An hour later, they were navigating the bustling city streets. The noise was much louder down here than it was from 60 floors up. The smells were a chaotic mix of street vendor hot dogs, exhaust fumes, and the faint scent of rain on hot pavement. As they rounded the corner onto the wide plaza in front of the courthouse, the noise intensified into a roar. Just like on the TV, a crowd was swarming the steps. Police officers stood with their arms crossed, forming a human barrier. Lily's hand tightened in her grandmother's. "Look, Grandma," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and a little bit of fear. And then she saw him. A sleek black car pulled up, and he got out. He was taller than he looked on TV. He wore a dark suit, just like she'd imagined. The cameras flashed like 100 lightning bugs, and the people shouted things she couldn't quite make out. He started walking towards the big doors, a man beside him steering him through the storm. Elena tried to pull her along. "Come, Lily, let's cross the street here." But Lily was frozen. From here, across the plaza, she could see his face clearly for a few seconds. And it was just like she'd drawn it. His expression was a blank mask, but his eyes were worse. They weren't just sad anymore. They were empty, like the lights had been turned off inside. He looked like a ghost walking into his own haunted house. He was almost at the top of the steps. The big bronze doors were opening. He was about to disappear inside, into the place where they would say all the bad things about him, where no one would believe him. He would be all alone in there. The thought was unbearable. A fierce, unexplainable certainty surged through her small body. It wasn't a choice, it was an imperative. The drawing in her pocket felt warm against her leg. The promise she'd made to herself in the dark last night echoed in her ears. Before her grandmother could stop her, she let go of Elena's hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the roar of the crowd. He was about to go inside. It was now or never. "Hi family, have you subscribed? Please do. Thanks." Folded hands. The world seemed to slow down as she took her first step, then another, her small legs moving faster than they ever had before, carrying her out of the anonymous crowd and toward the center of the storm. The air crackled. For Julian, time had compressed into a series of disjointed, hypersensory snapshots. The grim set of Arthur's jaw, the glint of a camera lens, the desperate, hungry faces in the crowd, a sea of strangers who had already convicted him. He was on autopilot, a machine programmed to walk forward, to show nothing. Each step up the cold, granite stairs was a step further into the abyss. The great bronze doors began to swing inward, revealing the dim, cavernous maw of the courthouse lobby. A few more feet. Then he would be inside, sealed within the walls of his own judgment. Arthur's hand was a vice on his bicep. "Almost there, Julian. Keep your head up." But Julian's head felt impossibly heavy. His gaze was fixed on the threshold, the point of no return. The roar of the crowd was a physical pressure, a wave of condemnation washing over him. It was in this final, suspended moment, as he was about to be swallowed whole by the system, that the sound of the world changed. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a reporter's question. It was a single, high-pitched, childish voice, and it cut through the cacophony with the impossible clarity of a silver bell. "Wait!" The word was so unexpected, so out of place, that it acted like a circuit breaker. For a fraction of a second, the mob's clamor seemed to falter. Julian stopped, his foot hovering over the final step. Arthur, startled, turned his head. Even the security guards seemed to hesitate. Julian turned slowly, his movements stiff. His eyes scanned the crowd, expecting, he didn't know what. Another accuser? A protester with a sign? And then he saw her. She was a tiny thing, a flash of pink in a sea of drab gray and black. A little girl, no older than 8 or 9, with wide, dark eyes and a fierce, determined set to her small chin. She had somehow slipped past the police line and was standing alone in the cleared space at the bottom of the steps, her chest heaving as if she'd run a marathon. Her hand was held up, palm forward, a gesture of almost comical authority. For a moment, nobody moved. The scene was surreal. The billionaire, the lawyers, the police, the ravenous media, all held captive by the sudden, inexplicable appearance of a child. Then, from the edge of the crowd, another voice, frantic and panicked. "Lily, Mija, come back." An older woman, her grandmother, was trying to push her way through, her face a mask of fear and confusion. But the girl Lily didn't look back. Her eyes were fixed on Julian, not on his suit or the men flanking him, but directly on him. And in her gaze, there was none of the contempt or morbid curiosity he had grown so accustomed to. There was only an unnerving, profound sincerity. Arthur Vance, recovering first, was a study in controlled fury. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, turning to a security guard. "Get her out of here. Now." The guards started to move, their large frames lumbering towards the small girl. Julian watched, a strange detachment settling over him. He saw the guards approaching her, saw the fear finally flicker in her eyes as these giants in uniform bore down on her. He should have turned away, should have let them handle it, should have walked through the damn doors and left this bizarre interruption behind. It was nothing to do with him. But he didn't turn away. Because for the first time in months, someone was looking at him not as a symbol, but as a person. And that look, that strange, unwavering belief in her eyes, resonated with a part of him he thought had long since died. He did something he hadn't done in years. He broke protocol. He acted on pure, uncalculated impulse. "Stop," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the authority of a man used to being obeyed. The security guards froze mid-stride, turning to him with confused expressions. Arthur shot him a look that could curdle milk. "Julian, what are you doing? Get inside." "Just wait," Julian said, his gaze still locked on the girl. He took a single step back down, closing a fraction of the distance between them. The cameras, sensing a new, unexpected drama, went into a frenzy. The clicking and flashing intensified. "What do you want?" Julian asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Lily swallowed hard, her small hands balling into fists at her sides. She seemed to be gathering all the courage in her tiny body. She looked from Julian to Arthur Vance, whose face was a thundercloud of expensive impatience. She saw the way Arthur looked at Julian, not with support, but with a kind of weary frustration, as if Julian were a difficult asset to manage. She saw Julian's isolation, a stark, invisible wall around him that everyone could see, but no one dared to breach. And then the words came out, not a whisper, but a clear, defiant declaration that echoed across the stone plaza. "He's leaving you," she said, pointing a small, trembling finger at Arthur Vance. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Arthur scoffed, an incredulous, dismissive sound. "This is ridiculous. The child is delusional." Julian frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Him," Lily insisted, her voice gaining strength. The fancy lawyer. He's going to leave you all alone. His eyes are the same as the kids at school who promise to be on your team, but then pick someone else when the game starts. It was the most absurd, childishly simple accusation imaginable. And yet, it struck a chord of truth so deep inside Julian that it made his blood run cold. Arthur's words from the night before echoed in his mind. Manage your expectations. We're going to take a hit. It wasn't the sound of a general going to war. It was the sound of a strategist planning a tactical retreat. Arthur's face, for a split second, lost its composure. A flicker of something, anger? Guilt? Crossed his features before being buried under a fresh layer of professional indignation. That's enough. Julian, we're going. Now. He grabbed Julian's arm again, this time with a bruising force. But before he could pull Julian away, the courtroom doors behind them swung fully open. A junior associate from Arthur's firm stood there, his face pale, holding a phone. Mr. Vance, the associate said, his voice trembling. It's Judge Albright's clerk. The prosecution. They've just filed a motion to seize all of Mr. Croft's personal assets, effective immediately. They're citing flight risk. The judge, he's signing it. The world stopped. This was it. The knockout punch Arthur had warned him about, but worse. Not just a hit, a decapitation. Without his assets, he couldn't fund his defense. He couldn't pay Arthur's astronomical fees. He was, in an instant, financially neutered. Powerless. Arthur Vance went perfectly still. His grip on Julian's arm loosened. He looked from the pale associate to Julian's stunned face. The cold, hard calculus of a high-stakes lawyer was visible in his eyes. The case had just gone from incredibly difficult to fiscally impossible. A pro bono case for a disgraced billionaire was not in the Vance and Associates business model. His reputation was built on wins, not on noble, career-ending losses. He took a deliberate step back from Julian, the movement subtle but seismic. He straightened his tie, smoothing the lapels of his suit. He was no longer a shield. He was an observer. My apologies, Julian, Arthur said, his voice stripped of all its earlier warmth, returning to the cool, transactional tone of a businessman cutting his losses. This development materially changes the nature of our engagement. My firm, we can no longer represent you. I'll have my office forward you the final invoice. And then he turned. He turned his back on Julian Croft, on the case, on the man whose freedom he had been paid millions to protect. He walked, briskly and without a backward glance, toward the pale-faced associate, disappearing into the darkness of the courthouse lobby. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The reporters surged forward, their questions a chaotic, frenzied roar. Mr. Croft, you've been abandoned by your counsel. What will you do now? Are you officially bankrupt? Julian stood alone on the steps, the suit suddenly feeling like a costume. The armor had been ripped away, leaving him naked and exposed. The silence in his head was absolute, a roaring vacuum where his future used to be. He was falling, and there was no net. The emptiness in his own eyes, the one he'd seen in the mirror, was now a vast, bottomless chasm. He felt 100 hands pulling at him, 1,000 questions suffocating him. He was drowning. And then once more her voice, louder this time, fiercer, a beacon in the storm. From the bottom of the steps, the little girl in the pink sweater took a step forward, planting her feet as if preparing for battle. Her eyes were blazing, filled with a righteous, furious fire. She looked at Julian, at his utter devastation, and then she glared at the bronze doors that had swallowed his lawyer. She lifted her chin, and with all the force her small lungs could muster, she screamed the words that would change everything. I can defend him. The roar of the media stuttered into a shocked, absolute silence. Every camera, every microphone, every eye swung from the ruined millionaire to the impossible, defiant, 8-year-old girl. Julian's head snapped up. He stared down at her, at this tiny, impossible creature who had just declared war on the entire world on his behalf. Her words hung in the air, vibrating with an insane, breathtaking conviction. It was the most ludicrous, hopeless, and beautiful thing he had ever heard. And in the deepest, most broken part of his soul, a tiny, forgotten flicker of light was rekindled. The moment hung in the air, surreal and fragile, before shattering into 1,000 pieces of renewed chaos. The media, recovering from their collective shock, descended into a state of near hysteria. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a spectacle, a bona fide circus. The image was irresistible. The disgraced boy Wonder, abandoned and broken, and the tiny unknown child offering herself as his champion. Who is she? What did she say? Get a shot of the girl. Get the girl. Lily's grandmother, Elena, finally broke through the wall of bodies, her face etched with terror. She wrapped her arms around Lily, pulling her back from the center of the storm. Ay, Dios mío, Lily. What have you done? She whispered, her voice trembling as she tried to shield her granddaughter from the flashing lights. Julian was still frozen on the steps, the girl's impossible declaration echoing in the ringing silence of his mind. I can defend him. It was a child's fantasy, a nonsensical outburst. It meant nothing. It was a random, bizarre footnote in the story of his spectacular downfall. He should ignore it. He should turn, walk into that courthouse, and face the judge alone. He should surrender to the inevitable. But he couldn't. Her words, her fierce, unwavering gaze, had short-circuited his spiral into despair. It was like being shocked back to life. The raw injustice of his situation, which had been slowly suffocating him, was suddenly externalized, mirrored in the righteous anger of this little girl. His security team, recovering their wits, moved in, creating a protective circle around him. Mr. Croft, we need to get you inside now, the head guard urged, his hand on Julian's back. Julian allowed himself to be moved, stumbling up the final steps and through the bronze doors. The noise of the plaza was abruptly cut off, replaced by the hushed, echoing marble expanse of the courthouse lobby. He was led down a corridor away from the public eye, into a small, sterile witness waiting room. The door clicked shut behind him, plunging him into a sudden, jarring quiet. He sank onto a hard plastic chair, the adrenaline leaving him weak and shaky. The events of the last 5 minutes replayed in his mind, a fever dream of flashing lights and a child's defiant cry. He dropped his head into his hands, the rough texture of his palms against his face a grounding sensation. Arthur was gone. His assets were frozen. He had no lawyer. He was, for all intents and purposes, defenseless. A lamb to the slaughter. And an 8-year-old girl thought she could save him. A humorless, brittle laugh escaped his lips. It was insane. He was clinging to the words of a child because he had nothing else. He was resisting the reality of his situation, the cold, hard fact that he was utterly and completely ruined. He started pacing the small room, a caged animal. He had to think. He had to be logical. This emotional whiplash was dangerous. The girl meant nothing. She was a distraction, a momentary anomaly. He had to focus on the legal reality. He could request a public defender. He could try to reason with the judge. He could what? The case was a labyrinth of complex financial data, of corporate law so intricate it made seasoned lawyers' heads spin. A public defender would be hopelessly out of their depth, buried under the mountain of fabricated evidence the prosecution had built. He was resisting the truth. He was done. And yet, I can defend him. The memory of her face, so full of fire, was an anchor in the swirling chaos of his thoughts. It was a purity he hadn't encountered in his entire adult life. In his world, loyalty was a commodity, a line item on a balance sheet. It was bought and sold, and its value depreciated over time. Arthur Vance had just proven that. But this girl, she owed him nothing. She knew nothing about him, other than the lies she'd seen on TV and whatever she thought she saw in his eyes. And still, she had stood up for him. He was resisting the pull of that feeling, the dangerous, seductive warmth of it. Hope. It was a fool's emotion. Hope would get him nowhere. He needed a plan, a strategy. He pulled out his phone, his fingers scrolling through contacts. Who could he call? Former business partners? They had all distanced themselves weeks ago. Old friends from college? They wouldn't even know where to begin. Every door he could think of was closed and locked. He was alone. He had to accept it. He had to let go of the girl's absurd offer and face the cold, hard truth. Meanwhile, in the whirlwind outside, Elena was fighting a desperate battle. She clutched Lily's hand, trying to drag her away from the reporters who were now swarming them, shoving microphones and cameras into their faces. Ma'am, what's your name? Is she his daughter? A relative? Why did you say that, little girl? Do you know Mr. Croft? Lily was terrified now. The abstract idea of helping the sad man had become a frightening, loud reality. She buried her face in her grandmother's coat, the smell of lavender a small comfort in the overwhelming chaos. Leave her alone. She's a child, Elena shouted, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. She pushed through the throng, a small, fierce woman protecting her charge. She finally managed to break free, half running, half dragging Lily down the street and around the corner, away from the courthouse plaza. She didn't stop until they were 2 blocks away, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She leaned against a brick wall, pulling Lily into a tight, protective hug. Lily, what were you thinking?" Elena whispered, stroking her hair. "Look at the trouble you've caused." Lily looked up, her eyes full of tears. "I had to, Grandma. Did you see his face when that other man left? He looked like he was disappearing. I had to say something." Elena's heart ached. Her granddaughter's compassion was a beautiful, powerful thing, but the world was not a kind place for such purity. "I know, Mija. I know your heart. But this is not our fight. This is a world of powerful, complicated men. We are small people. We cannot get involved." "But it's not fair," Lily insisted, her fear giving way to a renewed wave of indignation. She pulled away from her grandmother's embrace, her small body tense with conviction. "Everyone thinks he's bad, but he's not. I know it. And now he has no one. It's not fair to leave someone all alone when they're sad." She was resisting her grandmother's logic, the practical, sensible truth that they were powerless. She refused to accept that her gesture meant nothing. In her mind, she had made a promise, a declaration. You don't just shout something like that and then walk away. You had to see it through. Elena sighed, looking down at her granddaughter's determined face. It was a look she knew well. It was the look of unshakable conviction. Trying to talk Lily out of it now would be like trying to convince a river not to flow to the sea. "Okay," Elena said softly, making a decision. "Okay, my little dove. But we are not going back there. Not into that madness." She took Lily's hand. "Let's go to my appointment. We will sit, and we will be quiet, and we will think about what to do next. But no more shouting." Lily nodded, though her mind was already racing. She had resisted her fear. She had resisted her grandmother's pragmatism. Now she had to figure out how to resist the entire world's opinion of Julian Croft. She reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around the folded piece of paper. Her drawing. It was her only piece of evidence, the starting point of her entire case. As they walked towards the drab clinic building, Lily looked back over her shoulder. The courthouse stood tall and imposing, a stone fortress. Mr. Croft was in there somewhere, alone. She had made a promise, and she had no idea how to keep it. But the thought of breaking it, of simply going home and letting him disappear, was impossible to even consider. The tension was rising in both of them, worlds apart. Julian, in his sterile room, was fighting against the pull of a hope he couldn't afford to feel. Lily, in the bustling city streets, was fighting against the reality of a world that was too big for her to change. Both were resisting the emotional implications of what had just happened. He was trying to explain it away as a meaningless anomaly. She was clinging to it as a sacred duty. And somewhere, in the heart of the granite fortress that separated them, the wheels of a merciless justice system were beginning to turn. The courthouse was a machine, and it was not designed to wait. Inside the small waiting room, Julian's fragile composure was shattering. He had been left alone for what felt like an eternity, the silence amplifying his powerlessness. Every ticking second was a second closer to his arraignment, a proceeding he would now have to face without counsel, a defendant stripped bare before the law. The door finally opened, but it wasn't a court officer. It was Maria, his assistant. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of panic and pity. She was holding a tablet. "Mr. Croft." "Julian," she began, her voice unsteady. "It's everywhere. The video of what happened outside, it's gone viral. Every news outlet, social media, they're calling her the courthouse kid." She turned the tablet towards him. The screen was filled with clips of the chaotic scene. His own face, stark and broken. Arthur Vance's cold retreat. And then the focal point of every report, Lily. The camera had zoomed in on her face as she shouted her declaration, her expression a potent cocktail of childish innocence and fierce loyalty. The headlines were sensational. Billionaire's mystery guardian angel. Who is the 8-year-old girl who offered to defend Julian Croft? A wave of nausea washed over him. This wasn't just a disaster. It was a media circus of unprecedented proportions. He had become a public spectacle, and this child, this innocent bystander, had been dragged into the center of it. He felt a sharp, unfamiliar pang of guilt. "They're trying to identify her," Maria continued, her voice barely a whisper. "The reporters are turning the area upside down. Her grandmother was seen pulling her away, but someone got a photo. Before he could process this, the door opened again. This time, it was a stern-faced bailiff. "Croft, the judge wants to see you in his chambers." "Now." The bailiff's eyes flicked to Maria. "You wait here." Julian stood, his legs feeling like lead. This was it. The walk to the gallows. He followed the bailiff down a series of quiet, wood-paneled corridors, the air thick with the scent of old paper and floor polish. The silence was unnerving, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. They stopped before a heavy oak door marked, "The Honorable Judge Albright." The bailiff knocked, a voice from within grunted an affirmative, and the door was opened. Judge Albright was an imposing man in his late 60s, with a mane of white hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the courthouse itself. He sat behind a massive cluttered desk, his judicial robes making him seem less like a man and more like an institution. He was not looking at Julian. He was looking at a small television screen on his credenza, which was playing on a loop the footage of Lily. He muted the television with a click of his remote and finally turned his cold, piercing gaze on Julian. "Mr. Croft," he began, his voice a low rumble. "We have a situation. A rather theatrical one." Julian stood silently, his hands clasped behind his back. Saying nothing felt safer than saying the wrong thing. "Your counsel has formally withdrawn," the judge continued, steepling his fingers. "Your assets have been frozen pending trial. And you have become, in the last 30 minutes, the star of a national melodrama, co-starring a minor. This is not how my courtroom operates. I do not deal in melodrama." He paused, letting the weight of his disapproval fill the room. "Ordinarily, I would assign you a public defender and proceed with the arraignment. But the media attention this outburst has generated complicates things. It risks turning this trial into a mockery before it even begins. It has created a logistical and public relations nightmare right on my doorstep." The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "I am not a fan of circuses, Mr. Croft, so I am going to do something highly unorthodox. I am postponing your arraignment for 48 hours. I am granting you release on your own recognizance, under the condition that you remain within city limits." Julian's head snapped up, stunned. Release? It was the last thing he expected. "Do not mistake this for kindness," the judge warned, his voice like chipping ice. "This is a practical matter. I want you to get this situation under control. I want this media frenzy to die down. And I want you to find competent legal representation. The court cannot proceed fairly under these conditions. But most of all," he said, his gaze flicking back to the silent television, "I want you to deal with that." He pointed a thick finger at the screen, where Lily's face was frozen mid-declaration. "This child has been thrust into a dangerous and inappropriate spotlight because of your case. Find her, you and her legal guardian. Make this go away. I want a statement of retraction, an apology for the disruption. Something, anything, to put this fire out. Am I clear?" Julian could only nod, his throat too dry to speak. "You have 48 hours to put your house in order, Mr. Croft. If you fail, when you return to my courtroom, I will not be in a lenient mood. Now get out of my sight." Elena's appointment at the city clinic was a blur. She couldn't concentrate on the doctor's words about her blood pressure. Her own heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Lily sat beside her in the waiting room, unnaturally quiet, her hand never leaving her grandmother's. The other people in the clinic were murmuring, looking at their phones, and then glancing over at Lily with a new, dawning recognition. The news was spreading like wildfire. As soon as they left the clinic, Elena's worst fears were realized. A reporter, a young man with slick hair and predatory eyes, recognized them from the photos circulating online. "That's her. That's the girl," he shouted, and suddenly they were surrounded again, not by the massive throng of the courthouse plaza, but by a smaller, more persistent pack of journalists who had fanned out across the neighborhood. "Ma'am, please, just a name." "Why did she do it?" Elena pushed through them, her face a mask of grim determination. "Leave us be," she cried, her voice cracking. She hailed a taxi, bundling a terrified Lily inside and shouting her address to the driver. As the taxi pulled away, she saw flashes from cameras capturing the license plate. There was no escape. They knew where she lived. They rode home in a tense, frightened silence. When they reached their modest apartment building, a news van was already parked across the street. A lone cameraman was filming the entrance. "Stay in the car," Elena ordered the driver, her mind racing. She paid him, then turned to Lily. Mija, when I say run, we run. Straight to the door. Do you understand? Lily nodded, her small face pale. The fun, righteous adventure had curdled into something terrifying. They ran. They burst out of the taxi and sprinted across the sidewalk, the cameraman jogging after them. Elena fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking, finally getting the lobby door open and slamming it shut behind them. They collapsed against it, their hearts pounding in unison. Grandma, I'm scared, Lily whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I know, my love. I know, Elena said, hugging her tight. We will be all right. We are home now. We are safe. Hi family, have you subscribed? Please do. Thanks, folded hands. But she knew it was a lie. Their small, quiet life had been breached. Their home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a target. They had been in the apartment for less than an hour, the blinds drawn, the TV off, when a firm, official knock echoed on their door. It wasn't the police. It wasn't a reporter. Elena opened the door a crack, her heart in her throat. A woman in a smart, professional suit stood there. It was Maria. Behind her, standing awkwardly in the dim hallway of the apartment building, was Julian Croft. He looked different without the armor of his suit. He had changed into a simple dark sweater and slacks, but he still seemed profoundly out of place, a creature from another world. His face was drawn and tired, and when his eyes met Elena's, she saw not the arrogance of a billionaire, but the deep, weary shame of a man caught in a storm of his own making. Mrs. Maria began, her voice gentle. Elena Morales, Elena supplied, her grip tightening on the door. My name is Maria. This is my employer, Mr. Julian Croft. Maria's expression was pleading. We are not here to cause trouble. I promise. We need to talk to you. The judge, he ordered Mr. Croft to speak with you. Elena's protective instincts flared. We have nothing to say to you. You've brought nothing but trouble to our door. Look outside. From behind Elena, a small voice piped up. Let them in, Grandma. Elena turned. Lily was standing there, her fear replaced by a solemn curiosity. She was looking past her grandmother, directly at Julian. Julian met the girl's gaze. In the sterile environment of the courthouse, she had been a symbol, an idea. Here, in the hallway of this humble building, she was just a little girl in a pink sweater, standing in the doorway of her home, a home he had inadvertently besieged. The guilt twisted in his gut. Reluctantly, Elena opened the door wider. 5 minutes, she said, her tone sharp. Julian and Maria stepped inside. The apartment was small, meticulously clean, and filled with a warmth and character that felt alien to Julian. A plastic cat clock ticked on the wall. A half-finished puzzle sat on a coffee table. It was a home. He felt like an intruder, a contamination. He, Maria, Elena, and Lily stood in the small living room, an awkward, silent tableau. The chasm between their two worlds felt a mile wide. He, the man who lived in a glass tower, and they, the family living in this small, cozy space, were now bound together by a judge's order and a child's outburst. They were reluctant, unable to separate, thrown together into the eye of the hurricane. Julian finally found his voice, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. Mrs. Morales. Lily, he began, his gaze shifting to the girl. I am so sorry. For all of this. I never intended for you to be involved. Lily just looked at him, her expression unreadable. She took a step forward, her small hand reaching into her pocket. She pulled out the folded, slightly crumpled piece of paper. Slowly, she unfolded it and held it out to him. It was her drawing, the clumsy, childish sketch of his face. But the eyes she had captured the hollow, haunted look perfectly. He stared at the drawing, a lump forming in his throat. This was her evidence. This was the source of her conviction. Not data, not legal precedent, but a child's raw, unfiltered empathy. You looked like you needed help, she said simply, her voice quiet but clear. So I decided to help you. And in that moment, the carefully constructed walls Julian had built around his heart began to crack. The judge had forced them into this room, but it was the girl's simple, profound statement that truly bound them together. The mystery of her actions was no mystery at all. It was just kindness, and he had no idea what to do with it. The small living room was thick with a tense, unspoken energy. Julian held the child's drawing in his hand, the paper feeling both fragile and incredibly heavy. He stared at the crudely rendered face, at the sad, hollow eyes that a little girl had somehow seen more clearly than anyone else. It was an indictment, not of his alleged crimes, but of the profound isolation that had become the architecture of his life. "The judge wants us to issue a joint statement," Maria said, gently trying to steer the situation back to its practical purpose. "A retraction. Something to calm the media. We could draft something, Mrs. Morales, that says Lily was overwrought, that she misspoke." Elena crossed her arms, her gaze hard. "You want her to lie?" She said what she felt. "You are the ones who turned it into a circus." "I know," Julian interjected, his voice low. He looked at Elena, then back at Lily. "She's right. This is my fault. And asking you to lie is not the solution." He felt a sudden, powerful aversion to the idea. For months, he had been suffocated by lies, the prosecutions, the media's. To now ask this child, the one person who had offered him a moment of raw truth, to fabricate a story felt like a deep and personal betrayal. "Then what do you want from us, Mr. Croft?" Elena asked, her voice softening slightly. She could see the conflict in his face. This was not the arrogant monster from the television. This was a man drowning. Before Julian could answer, Lily spoke up, her voice clear and direct. "I want to help you. I told you. But I can't help you if I don't know what happened." She looked at him with the serious, analytical gaze of a miniature detective. "Did you do it?" The question, so blunt and devoid of artifice, hung in the air. Maria winced. Elena held her breath. Julian felt the familiar, hot surge of defensive anger, the instinct to shut down, to retreat behind a wall of cold formality. But looking at Lily's earnest face, the anger dissipated, leaving only a vast, weary sadness. He had given his official denial to a dozen lawyers and investigators, a polished, rehearsed statement that no one had truly believed. But this child, she deserved more than a press release. He sank onto the edge of Elena's armchair, the floral pattern pressing into his slacks. He looked at the drawing in his hand, then at Lily. "No," he said, the word raw and quiet. "I didn't." "Then who did?" she pressed. He shook his head, a gesture of deep frustration. "I don't know. That's the problem. Someone betrayed me. Someone very close to me." He explained, in the simplest terms he could manage, what had happened. He spoke of his company, Croft Enterprises, which he'd built from a single idea in his dorm room. He spoke of its primary project, a revolutionary water purification system designed to bring clean drinking water to impoverished communities. He explained that the fire at the main laboratory had not only destroyed years of research, but also wiped the main servers. Except for one. A backup server that, mysteriously, contained fabricated data implicating him in a scheme to burn the lab for insurance money and sell a faulty patent. "They made it look like I was a failure," he said, the bitterness coating his words, "and that I tried to burn the evidence and cash out. But the system, it was on the verge of a breakthrough. It would have worked." As he spoke, Lily listened with an intensity that was almost unnerving. Elena, too, found herself drawn into the story, her initial hostility giving way to a grudging sympathy. This wasn't a story about numbers on a balance sheet. It was a story about a dream being turned to ash. Who had access to this backup server? Elena asked, her voice thoughtful. "Only a handful of people," Julian said wearily. "My chief financial officer, my head of research, and my partner, Robert." He said the name with a particular heaviness. Robert Vance, his oldest friend, his business partner from the very beginning. And as it happened, Arthur Vance's younger brother. A stunned silence fell over the room. "Your lawyer was your partner's brother?" Elena asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. Julian nodded, a grimace twisting his lips. "I thought it was a benefit. I thought it meant Arthur would fight harder for me, for his own family's reputation. But Robert, he's been distant for months. Since the fire, he's been a ghost. Arthur assured me he was just overwhelmed, that he was working behind the scenes to help. Now," he trailed off, the awful truth crystallizing. Arthur hadn't just abandoned a client. He had abandoned him the moment the case became a threat to his own brother. "Hi family, have you subscribed? Please do. Thanks, folded hands." Suddenly, a small detail, something he'd dismissed as unimportant, surfaced in his mind. He remembered the night of the fire. The alarm had gone off just after midnight. He had rushed to the lab, but the fire crews were already there, holding him back. He remembered seeing Robert across the street, watching the building burn. He wasn't panicked or devastated. He was just watching. and in his hand, he was nervously twisting something. A small silver object. Julian had been too consumed by his own horror to register it at the time. Lily, who had been watching his face intently, saw the shift in his expression. "What is it? What did you remember?" "Nothing," he said quickly, dismissing it. It was a flimsy memory, not evidence. Lily's gaze drifted from Julian's troubled face to the small, cluttered bookshelf beside the television. It was filled with Elena's paperback novels, some old photo albums, and a collection of Lily's school trophies and crafts. Her eyes landed on a small, ornate wooden box. It was her grandmother's treasure box, filled with little keepsakes and memories from a life she rarely spoke about. Driven by an impulse she didn't understand, Lily walked over to the bookshelf, stood on her tiptoes, and carefully lifted the box. She brought it back and set it on the coffee table. "Grandma," she said softly, "can I show him?" Elena looked at the box, and a shadow passed over her face. It was a look of old, deep-seated pain. That box contained the few precious things she had left from her daughter, Lily's mother, who had passed away when Lily was just a baby. "Lily, I don't think." "Please, Grandma," Lily insisted, her voice gentle but firm. "It's important." With a heavy sigh, Elena nodded. Lily opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of worn velvet, were a few faded photographs, a dried flower, and a small silver bracelet. It was a delicate chain, and dangling from it was a single charm, a beautifully crafted, intricate silver feather. Lily carefully lifted the bracelet from the box. "This was my mom's," she said, her voice a near whisper. She said it was her lucky charm. She was a lawyer, too. A different kind. The kind that helped people who didn't have any money. Julian stared at the bracelet, his blood turning to ice. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He couldn't breathe. The charm. The intricate silver feather. It was identical to the object he had seen Robert Vance twisting in his hand as their dream went up in flames. The memory, once hazy, was now shockingly clear. He remembered Robert receiving it as a gift years ago, from a woman he was dating at the time. A unique, custom-made piece from a niche designer. Robert had worn it on his keychain for years, a nervous habit, always twisting it between his fingers when he was stressed. "Mr. Croft," Lily asked, her voice small, seeing the blood drain from his face. "Are you okay?" He looked from the silver feather in her hand to her wide, innocent eyes. The pieces of the puzzle, scattered and meaningless before, slammed into place with a brutal, sickening force. Robert, the server, the fire, Arthur's abandonment. It was all connected. It was a conspiracy, a family affair designed to ruin him. No one had to say it out loud. The unadorned truth hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The clue to his salvation, the key to unraveling the entire lie, hadn't been found in a mountain of financial data or a high-tech investigation. It had been lying dormant in a little girl's treasure box, a painful memory from one life connecting to the hidden betrayal in another. The forced proximity of the judge's order had led them to this room. But it was this shared moment of unveiled history, Lily's painful, treasured past and Julian's dawning, horrific one, that shattered the last of their resistance. Their connection, forged in the fire of the media spectacle, was now being tempered by the weight of a hidden, devastating truth. And Julian knew, with a terrifying certainty, that his life was now inextricably linked to this little girl and her mother's silver feather. The revelation of the silver feather settled over the small apartment, not with a bang, but with a profound, transformative quiet. The frantic energy of the day, the media, the judge, the panic, receded, replaced by the gravity of what had just been unearthed. Julian stared at the delicate charm, the intricate metalwork a stark symbol of his friend's devastating betrayal. He felt a wave of dizziness, the kind that comes after a powerful shock, and he instinctively reached out, steadying himself on the arm of the chair. Maria, seeing his distress, took a step forward. "Mr. Croft." "Julian, maybe we should go. You need to rest." "No," Julian said, his voice quiet but firm. He looked up, not at Maria, but at Elena and Lily. "No, I'm not going anywhere." He wasn't just a client in their home anymore. He was a guest, a recipient of a staggering, unintentional gift. Leaving now felt unthinkable, like abandoning the first real lifeboat he'd seen in a year. Elena, sensing the shift, moved with a quiet, decisive grace. The crisis had broken through the barriers of class and circumstance, leaving only shared humanity. "You will stay," she said, her tone no longer challenging but declarative. You will stay for dinner. It's the least we can do. You look like you haven't had a real meal in weeks." It was an order, not an offer, and Julian found himself nodding in agreement, a sense of relief washing over him that was so profound it almost brought him to his knees. For the first time, he wasn't being managed or billed or analyzed. He was being cared for. "Thank you," he murmured, the words feeling inadequate. While Elena bustled in the small, adjoining kitchen, the sounds and smells of cooking, onions and garlic sizzling in oil, began to fill the apartment. It was a sense so fundamentally comforting, so alien to his own sterile, silent penthouse, that it felt like a form of therapy. Maria, sensing a deep and personal moment unfolding, excused herself. I'll wait in the car," she said softly. "Call me when you're ready." That left Julian and Lily alone in the living room. An awkward silence stretched between them for a moment. The silence of two people from different planets who had just discovered they spoke a common language. Lily, still holding the bracelet, sat on the rug at his feet. She looked from the feather to his face. "Does this help?" she asked. "The lucky charm?" Julian managed a small, fragile smile. I think it might be the key to everything, Lily." He tried to explain. "The man I told you about, Robert, he has one just like this. If we can prove he was at the lab, and that he was the only one who could have planted the fake data." He trailed off, the legal strategy still a nebulous cloud. But for the first time, there was a shape in the fog, a direction. He looked around the room, truly seeing it now. He saw the framed photos on the wall. Lily as a baby, a smiling young woman who must have been her mother, Elena standing proudly beside a small garden. He saw a stack of library books on law, not corporate law, but books on tenant rights, immigration law, civil liberties. "Your mother," he started, his voice gentle. "You said she was a lawyer." Lily nodded, her expression becoming solemn. "Grandma says she was a fighter. She fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. People the world forgot about." She looked down at the bracelet. She didn't have a lot of money, but she had this. And she had her books. A fragile, tentative bond began to form between them, woven from the threads of their shared predicament. He was no longer the sad rich man, and she was no longer just the courthouse kid. They were allies. He found himself talking, truly talking, for the first time in years. He told her not about his company's stock price or market share, but about the dream behind it. He described his travels in college to a remote village where the only water source was a contaminated river. He told her about the children he saw, sick and weak, and the feeling of utter helplessness that had ignited the fire in him to create the purification technology. He spoke of the excitement, the late nights in the lab with Robert, the shared belief that they were going to change the world. As he spoke, he wasn't addressing a child. He was speaking to a confidant, a pure soul who could understand the why behind his ambition, not just the what. Lily, in turn, shared her own world. She told him about her school, about her best friend who had moved away, about her dream of having a dog. She showed him her prized possession, a thick, worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that had belonged to her mother. "This is my favorite," she said, tracing the cover with her finger. "It's about a lawyer, Atticus Finch. He defends a man that everyone thinks is guilty. Even when it's scary. Even when the whole town is against him." My mom underlined all her favorite parts. She opened the book to a random page and, with a concentration that was both endearing and profound, read a line her mother had marked in faint pencil. "Courage is not a man with a gun in his hand. It's knowing you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway, and you see it through no matter what." The words struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. Knowing you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway. It was the perfect description of his own hopeless situation. It was the perfect description of what Lily had done for him on the courthouse steps. Elena called them to the table. It was a small, circular table, and they sat close together. She placed a steaming platter of arroz con pollo in the center. The aroma was rich and intoxicating. Julian realized he was starving. He hadn't felt true hunger in months, only the nervous, acidic churning of anxiety. He ate, and with each bite, he felt something inside him unclenching. They didn't talk about the case. They talked about small things. Elena told a funny story about trying to fix a leaky faucet. Lily described in great detail the plot of a cartoon she had watched. For a single blessed hour, Julian Croft ceased to exist. He was just Julian, a man sharing a meal in a warm kitchen, laughing at a little girl's story. There was a moment of peace, of safety, of shared vulnerability that felt more valuable than his entire frozen fortune. The chrome and glass of his penthouse seemed a universe away, a cold, lonely prison compared to this cluttered, loving space. It felt like healing was possible. After dinner, as Elena and Lily cleared the plates, Julian stood by the window, looking down at the street. The news van was still there, a lone predator waiting in the dark. The reality of his situation remained unchanged. But he felt different, stronger. He turned as Lily approached him, holding out her hand. In her palm was the silver feather bracelet. "You should keep it," she said, her expression serious. "For luck. It's evidence." He felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at the precious, irreplaceable memento from her mother, a treasure steeped in family history and loss. He couldn't possibly take it. "Lily, I can't," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is yours. It's too important." "It's more important that you win," she insisted, pressing it into his hand. "My mom would want you to have it. She was a fighter. Now you have to be one too." He closed his hand around the delicate chain, the cool metal a solid, tangible weight. It felt like a promise, a transfer of courage. He looked from the bracelet to her determined face, and then to Elena, who stood in the kitchen doorway, a sad, proud smile on her lips. In that moment, a bond was sealed. It was fragile, born of desperation and happenstance, but it was real. Forged not in a boardroom or a contract, but over a shared meal, a child's book, and a mother's memory. It felt like the beginning of something true. But as he looked out the window at the waiting cameras, he knew this fragile peace was not permanent. The war was still waiting for him. We've all had moments where a simple act of kindness from a stranger felt more meaningful than grand gestures from friends. What is the kindest thing a stranger has ever done for you? Share your story in the comments. It reminds us all of the good in the world. Julian left Elena and Lily's apartment just after 10 o'clock, the silver feather bracelet safely in his jacket pocket. The warmth of their home clung to him like a protective cloak as he stepped out into the chilly night air. Maria was waiting as promised, the sleek town car an alien vessel in the humble neighborhood. As they pulled away, the news van's camera light flicked on, capturing his departure. He didn't care. For the first time, the scrutiny felt distant, irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the fragile hope blooming in his chest and the weight of the charm in his pocket. The ride back to his penthouse was spent in a state of focused, electric energy. The despair had been replaced by a surge of adrenaline, a warrior's purpose. "Maria, I need you to do something for me," he said, his voice sharp with new authority. "I need you to find a private investigator. Not a corporate one. Someone discreet, someone who specializes in finding people, not assets. And I need a new lawyer. Someone hungry, someone who isn't afraid to fight a giant. Look outside the big firms. Find a bulldog." "And the feather?" Maria asked, her own professional spark reignited by his sudden transformation. "The feather is our key," Julian said, a grim smile touching his lips. "I know the designer who made it. She's an obscure artist in the city. Robert's ex-girlfriend. If she can confirm she made 2 identical charms. One for Robert, one for Lily's mother. And if we can prove Robert still has his, we can place him at the scene of the crime and establish a motive for Arthur Vance to bury the case. It's a start. It's more than a start. It's everything." The next 36 hours were a blur of focused activity. While Maria worked her network with a quiet, fierce efficiency, Julian threw himself into his own research. He felt alive, the intellectual and strategic parts of his brain firing on all cylinders for the first time in months. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. He converted his vast living room into a war room, covering the glass coffee table with documents, timelines, and notes. The emptiness of the penthouse was no longer oppressive. It was a command center. "Hi family, have you subscribed? Please do." Thanks folded hands. He felt a profound, almost paternal sense of responsibility for Lily and Elena. He had Maria arrange for a private, unmarked security detail to park on their street, ensuring no reporters could harass them. He had groceries and a new, top-of-the-line puzzle delivered to their door, a small, inadequate gesture of thanks. He called Elena once, just to check in, and the sound of her steady, calm voice was a grounding force. "Lily is asking about you," Elena had said. "She is praying for you." The words had hit him with unexpected force. Someone was praying for him. The idea was so foreign, so deeply moving, that he had to take a moment to compose himself. The bond was holding. It felt unbreakable. By the morning of his rescheduled arraignment, the pieces were falling into place. Maria had found the perfect investigator. A grizzled ex-cop named Sal who operated out of a dusty office above a pizzeria and had a reputation for finding needles in city-sized haystacks. She had also found a lawyer, a sharp, young woman named Ava Rollins who had recently left a major firm to start her own practice, eager to make a name for herself by slaying a dragon. Ava was a whirlwind. She met Julian at his penthouse 2 hours before they were due in court, her eyes blazing with intelligence and a fighter's spirit. He laid out the entire story: the betrayal, the frame-up, the Van Cess, and the silver feather. Ava listened, her expression growing more intense with every word. When he finished, she didn't offer platitudes or false hope. She looked him dead in the eye. "It's a long shot, Mr. Croft. A beautiful, cinematic long shot. A jury might see a grieving child's memento as a coincidence. We need more. We need to find Robert's feather." "Sal is working on it," Julian said. "He's tracking Robert's movements." "Good," Ava nodded. "For now, our goal is simple. We go into that courtroom, we plead not guilty, and we request bail. We use the new evidence, the connection between the Van Cess, to argue that your previous counsel had a massive conflict of interest, and that the flight risk assessment was based on his tainted advice. We just need to buy ourselves time." Walking into the courthouse for the second time was a completely different experience. The media was still there, but Julian walked through them with a newfound confidence, Ava at his side. He wasn't a victim today. He was a combatant. In the courtroom, the air was tense. Judge Albright looked down at them from his bench, his expression unreadable. Arthur and Robert Vance were sitting in the gallery, observing. Robert looked pale and nervous, his eyes darting around the room. The proceedings began. Ava was magnificent. She was respectful but firm, laying out the timeline of Arthur's withdrawal and presenting a clear, compelling argument for a conflict of interest. She formally entered Julian's plea of not guilty. Then came the bail hearing. The prosecutor stood, a shark smelling blood, and argued passionately that Julian was a flight risk, that with his network and hidden resources, he would disappear the moment he was free. "Your Honor," Ava countered smoothly, "Mr. Croft has every reason to stay. He is determined to clear his name and expose the conspiracy that has ruined his life and his company. A company dedicated not to profit, but to humanitarian aid." It was going well. Julian could feel it. The judge was listening, his expression thoughtful. The narrative was shifting. And then everything shattered. The prosecutor, with a dramatic flourish, turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the state has one more piece of evidence to submit regarding Mr. Croft's character and his methods of manipulation. Evidence that came to light only this morning." He gestured to the courtroom doors. They opened, and a bailiff walked in, followed by a nervous-looking man in a rumpled suit. Julian recognized him instantly. He was a low-level financial manager from a private wealth firm he had briefly consulted with over a year ago. "The state calls Mr. Henderson to make a statement," the prosecutor announced. Ava shot to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is an ambush. We had no prior notice of this witness. The evidence was only just uncovered, Your Honor," the prosecutor said smoothly. "It speaks directly to the defendant's methods." Judge Albright scowled, but waved a hand. "I'll allow it." Briefly, the man, Henderson, was sworn in. He was sweating profusely, refusing to look at Julian. "Mr. Henderson," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court about your professional dealings with the defendant, Mr. Croft?" Henderson swallowed, his eyes fixed on his shoes. Yes. Last year, Mr. Croft's company was exploring aggressive offshore investment strategies. He wanted to move a significant portion of his personal capital into untraceable accounts. Shell corporations, anonymous trusts, the kind of thing people do when they want to hide money. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Ava's face went white. Julian felt the floor drop out from under him. It was a lie. A complete, utter fabrication. He had consulted the firm, but it was to set up the financial framework for his humanitarian foundation, to ensure the money for the water purification projects could be moved efficiently and transparently to developing nations. Robert had been the one to recommend the firm. "Robert, and did you help him?" the prosecutor pressed. "No," Henderson mumbled. "Our firm has a strict ethics code. We declined, but he was very insistent. He offered me a bonus, a personal payment. to look the other way. It was a dagger in the heart. A perfect, targeted lie that twisted his best intentions into the blackest of motives. It painted him as exactly the kind of greedy, conocidive monster the media had made him out to be. The prosecutor turned to Julian, a triumphant smirk on his face. A man who tries to bribe financial managers to hide his money is a man who will flee. A man who uses shell corporations is a man with something to hide. He then delivered the killing blow, his voice dripping with sanctimonious pity. And it's clear he will use anyone to get what he wants. Even a vulnerable, impressionable child. He gestured toward the gallery. He spent hours in that little girl's apartment 2 nights ago. What was he doing? Coaching her? Promising her family money? Twisting her compassion into a tool for his own public relations? This isn't a man finding hope. This is a predator creating a pawn. The words hit Julian like a physical assault. He looked at the jury box and saw their faces, once neutral, now hardening with contempt. He looked at Judge Albright and saw the flicker of consideration replaced by a stony certainty. He looked over at Robert Vance, who was staring at him with a look of cold, reptilian victory. Robert had set this up. He had paid Henderson to lie, to deliver the one story that would not only destroy his bail chances, but also poison the one pure thing he had left. Ava was arguing, fiercely and brilliantly, but it was no use. The damage was done. The bond he had formed with Lily and Elena, a source of strength and hope, had been twisted into something ugly and manipulative. His brief moment of peace, his feeling of healing, it was all a lie, a delusion. The world would never see it as anything other than a cynical ploy. Judge Albright's gavel came down with a deafening crack. "Bail is denied," he declared, his voice booming through the shattered silence. "The defendant is remanded into custody until trial." The words were a death sentence. Remanded. Custody. Jail. The room spun. The security guards were moving towards him, their hands reaching for his arms. He felt a rough hand on his shoulder. He saw Ava's devastated face. He saw Arthur Vance's smug smile. But the only thing he could think of was Lily. He imagined her watching this on the news. He imagined her hearing the prosecutor's poisonous words. He imagined her believing them. He imagined her pure, unwavering faith in him curdling into doubt, then shame, then disgust. He, Julian Croft, had not only failed to protect himself, he had failed to protect her. He had taken her kindness and allowed it to be dragged through the mud, used as a weapon against him, and in doing so, destroyed her as well. The bond, which had felt so real, so strong, was utterly and irrevocably shattered. The last flicker of light was extinguished. As the guards led him away, a single devastating thought consumed him. He was not worthy of her faith. He never had been. He was just another man who had let her down. The world shrank to the size of a 10 by 12-foot cell. The muted gray of concrete, the cold gleam of stainless steel, the oppressive weight of processed, recycled air. The sounds of the city, the illusion of freedom, were replaced by the hollow clang of steel doors, the distant, anonymous shouts of other inmates, and the rhythmic, maddening drip of a leaky pipe somewhere down the hall. This was Julian's new reality. His glass tower had been replaced by a concrete box. He sat on the edge of the thin, hard mattress, the rough fabric of the prison-issued jumpsuit abrasive against his skin. The past few hours were a chaotic blur of fingerprinting, paperwork, and the quiet, humiliating process of being stripped of his possessions. His watch, his wallet, his tailored suit, and finally, the silver feather bracelet. He had tried to argue, to explain its significance, but the guard had just looked at him with bored indifference, dropping it into a small plastic bag with his other belongings. "You'll get it back when you leave," he'd said, the unspoken addendum, "if you leave," hanging in the air. Now he was alone, utterly and completely alone, in a way that made his previous loneliness feel like a crowded party. The prosecutor's words echoed in the small cell, a toxic, looping litany. Predator. Pawn. Manipulator. The accusations had not only sealed his legal fate, they had poisoned his soul. He replayed the last 48 hours in his mind, but the warmth and hope were gone, replaced by a bitter, searing self-recrimination. He had been a fool. A naive, sentimental fool. He had taken the pure, innocent kindness of a child and her grandmother and led them straight into the path of his own destruction. He hadn't protected them. He had exposed them. He had allowed their goodness to be used as a weapon, twisting it into something ugly and perverse. The bond he thought they had formed now felt like a delusion. What had he been thinking? that a little girl's drawing and a home-cooked meal could stand against the calculated, ruthless machinery of men like Robert and Arthur Vance? He had dragged Lily and Elena into his war, and they were going to be casualties. Their names, their faces, were now public record, linked to his disgrace. He pictured Lily at school, the whispers in the hallway. He imagined Elena in her neighborhood, the suspicious glances from her neighbors. He had contaminated them. Pride, the cold, hard pride that had been his armor for so long, reasserted itself, now laced with shame. He had been weak. He had allowed himself to feel, to hope. And this was the price. He should have stayed in his tower. He should have fought his battle alone, and lost it alone. At least then, the collateral damage would have been his and his alone. He made a decision, a cold, hard choice born of despair and a twisted sense of protection. He had to cut them off. He had to sever the connection completely. For their sake. When Ava came to see him, and he knew she would, he would tell her to drop the angle about the feather. He would tell her to issue a statement that he had never met the child before the incident, that their subsequent meeting was a court-ordered formality and nothing more. He would paint himself as the cold, distant billionaire everyone already believed him to be. He would burn the bridge to save them from the fire of his own ruin. It was the only honorable thing left to do. He would choose the path of avoidance, of retreat, to protect them from any further harm. He would embrace the lie to give them back their truth. The evening news was on in the small apartment. The volume turned down low, but the images were sharp and devastating. Elena sat in her armchair, her hands gripping the armrests, her face a mask of disbelief and pain. Lily sat on the floor, her back ramrod straight, her gaze fixed on the screen. They had watched it all. They had seen Julian, looking so confident, walk into the courthouse. They had seen the sneering face of the prosecutor. And they had heard his words, each one a poisoned dart. Predator. Pawn. Manipulator. Elena felt a wave of nausea. She looked at Lily, expecting to see her granddaughter's world crumbling, expecting to see the tears, the confusion, the heartbreak of a child whose hero has been revealed as a villain. But Lily wasn't crying. Her expression was one of intense, furious concentration. Her small hands were clenched into tight fists. When the news anchor repeated the prosecutor's accusation, that Julian had likely paid or coerced them, Lily's head snapped up. He didn't, she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. I know, Mija, Elena said, her own voice trembling. I know he didn't. But they are trying to make the world believe it. It's a lie, Lily repeated, standing up. She started pacing the small living room, her movements agitated, mirroring the way Julian had paced the same floor just 2 nights before. That man in the suit, the one who lied about the money. He was working with them, with the fancy lawyer and his brother. Elena stared at her. How can you be so sure? Because it's a trick, Lily said, her voice rising with frustration and a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. It's like in the movies. When the bad guy is about to get caught, he doesn't just give up. He does one last, really mean thing to try and win. He tried to make Mr. Croft look bad, but he also tried to make us look bad. He's trying to scare us, so we run away and hide. She stopped pacing and looked at her grandmother, her eyes blazing. He wants us to be quiet. He wants us to doubt. That's how he wins. In that moment, Lily was faced with her own choice. The world was telling her she had been a fool, a pawn in a rich man's game. The safe, easy path was to retreat, to believe the lie, to let her fear and embarrassment sever the bond she had felt, to choose avoidance, to hide from the public shame and let Julian face his fate alone. But her mother's copy of To Kill a Mockingbird was still on the coffee table. She walked over to it, her hand resting on the worn cover. It's knowing you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway, and you see it through no matter what. Her mother wouldn't have run. Atticus Finch wouldn't have run. And she wouldn't either. She had to choose between her own safety and the truth, between her pride and her loyalty. Grandma, she said, her voice suddenly calm, all its agitation replaced by a cold, hard resolve. We have to go back. Elena's heart skipped a beat. Go back where, Lily? To the courthouse? They will eat you alive. Not to the courthouse, Lily said, her mind working, connecting the dots with a child's simple, powerful logic. We have to find the proof. The other feather. She turned to Elena, her expression pleading. The lawyer lady. Ava. We have to call her. We have to tell her what we think. We have to help her, and that Sal man look. We can't let him do this alone. Not now. It was a reckless, dangerous idea. It meant running back into the fire, not away from it. It meant facing the public scorn, the media, the powerful men who were trying to destroy them. But it was a choice for truth, for vulnerability, for connection. Elena looked at her granddaughter, at the fierce, unwavering light in her eyes. It was the same light she used to see in her own daughter's eyes. A fire that refused to be extinguished by fear. She felt her own fear receding, replaced by a wave of protective, righteous anger. They had insulted her family. They had questioned her granddaughter's heart. They had declared war on the wrong people. She took a deep breath, her decision made. She would follow her granddaughter into battle. "All right, my little dove," Elena said, her voice steady and strong. "Let's find the number for that lawyer. It's time we fought back." Alone in his cell, Julian had made his choice, retreating into a shell of protective isolation. And in a small, warm apartment across the city, a little girl made hers, reaching out, refusing to let the bond be broken by a lie. One had chosen to sever the connection to protect the other. The other had chosen to strengthen it for the very same reason. The reckoning was coming, and everything now depended on who would win. The man who had given up hope, or the child who refused to let him. The next 24 hours were the longest of Julian's life. He refused to see Ava. He refused to speak to anyone. He sat in his cell, a willing martyr, building the walls around his heart thicker and higher with every passing hour. He was protecting Lily, he told himself. This was his penance. He ate the tasteless food, stared at the concrete walls, and waited for the slow, grinding process of the law to consume him. He was a man who had accepted his fate. He was completely unaware of the storm raging outside his prison walls. Ava Rollins, initially devastated by Julian's refusal to see her, was about to retreat and regroup when she received a call from a number she didn't recognize. It was Elena Morales. "Ms. Rollins," Elena said, her voice a mixture of steel and urgency, "my granddaughter and I, we are not pawns. And we are not afraid. Lily believes she knows how they are tricking you. We want to help." Ava met them half an hour later in a small, quiet coffee shop far from the courthouse. Lily, perched on a booster seat, laid out her theory with a stunning, simple clarity. "They needed to make him look bad right at the end," she explained, stirring her hot chocolate with intense focus. "So they used a new person to tell a lie. That means the brother, Robert, he's scared. He knows you're looking for his lucky feather. He's hiding it." Sal, the grizzled PI, sat with them, a skeptical frown on his face. He had been tailing Robert Vance for 2 days with no luck. The man was a ghost, moving between his high-security condo and his brother's office, never going anywhere or doing anything that could expose the charm. "Kid, he's not carrying it," Sal grunted. "We've got nothing." "That's because he wouldn't keep it on him," Lily insisted, looking from Sal to Ava. "It's too important. If you had a super-secret treasure, would you carry it in your pocket where you could lose it? No, you'd hide it somewhere safe. Somewhere you go all the time. Somewhere you feel comfortable." Ava's eyes lit up. "His office. His condo. Sal, you've been watching them." "Watertight," Sal said, shaking his head. "Can't get in either place without a warrant, and we don't have enough for a warrant." Elena, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke. "What about his car?" Everyone turned to her. "A car's not that secure," Sal said. "Some men," Elena said, a knowing, world-weary look in her eyes, "their car is their castle. It is the only place that is truly theirs. Private. They keep things there. Important papers. A change of clothes. Secrets." It was a long shot, based on nothing more than intuition, but they were out of other options. Sal, with a sigh of resignation, agreed to focus his attention on Robert's vehicle, a dark gray sedan parked in the reserved, high-security garage beneath his office building. The wait was agonizing. Ava filed motion after motion, trying to appeal the bail decision, all of which were denied. The media narrative had solidified. Julian Croft was a manipulative monster. The story of the courthouse kid was now being told as a cautionary tale of a child exploited by a ruthless tycoon. Then, late in the afternoon, Sal called. His voice was electric. "I got it." Robert Vance, jittery and paranoid, had made a mistake. Before leaving for the day, he'd gone to his car, but not to drive it. He had just sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, a man seeking a moment of refuge. Sal, using a powerful telephoto lens from a surveillance van parked across the street, had watched him. Just before getting out, Robert had reached up and pulled down the sun visor. For a split second, As he checked his reflection in the vanity mirror, something had dangled from the clip. A small, silver object that glinted in the dim garage light. A silver feather. It was the photo they needed. It wasn't proof he'd been at the lab, but it was proof he possessed the twin to Lily's charm. And more importantly, it was proof he still had it after the fire. A direct contradiction to the story he'd surely concocted that it had been lost or stolen, coupled with the testimony of the jewelry designer, whom Ava had already located and who was willing to testify she'd made only 2 such charms. It was enough. It was enough for a warrant. It was enough to blow the case wide open. The next morning, Julian was being led from his cell for his formal arraignment hearing when he saw Ava striding down the corridor toward him, her face lit with a triumphant, blazing fire. "They have him," she said, her voice low and urgent. "They searched Robert Vance's car an hour ago. They found the feather. They also found a burner phone with encrypted texts between him and Henderson, the witness who lied. They're arresting Robert for arson, perjury, and conspiracy. Arthur Vance is being brought in for questioning. It's over, Julian. It's all coming down." Julian stared at her, the words not computing. Over? He felt a slow, seismic shift inside him, the thick walls of his self-imposed prison beginning to crack. "How?" he whispered. "You have a hell of a team," Ava said with a grin. "And your lead counsel is a very, very smart 8-year-old girl." She explained everything. Lily's theory, Elena's intuition, Sal's photograph, the entire, impossible chain of events that had been set in motion while he had been sitting in the dark, surrendering. He felt a wave of shame so profound it almost buckled his knees, immediately followed by a tidal wave of gratitude that washed it all away. He hadn't been protecting them by pushing them away. He had been abandoning them, and they, in return, had refused to abandon him. They had chosen to fight for him when he would not fight for himself. The arraignment was no longer his. It was Robert Vance's. Julian was released an hour later. The charges against him formally dropped, pending the full investigation into the Vance brothers. The process of unfreezing his assets began immediately. As he walked out of the courthouse, the same doors he had entered as a condemned man, the world looked different, brighter. The air smelled sweeter. The media was there, of course, but their tone had changed. The frenzy was now directed at the Vances. The narrative had been upended. Julian was no longer the villain. He was the victim. Ava was there, and Maria, her eyes shining with tears of relief. But Julian was looking past them, scanning the crowd. And then he saw them. Elena and Lily were standing near the edge of the plaza, away from the main crush of reporters, exactly where he had first seen them. Lily was wearing her pink sweater. He walked towards them, his steps measured and certain. The crowd parted for him. He stopped in front of them, the cacophony of the world fading into a muted hum. He looked at Elena, and the gratitude he felt was too immense for words. He simply nodded, a gesture of profound, silent respect that she returned with a warm, knowing smile. Then he knelt, bringing himself down to Lily's level. For a long moment, he just looked at her, at this tiny, fierce, brilliant soul who had saved him. The words he had prepared, the thank yous, the apologies, all seemed trivial, inadequate. "You were right," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small plastic bag containing his personal effects. He opened it and took out her mother's silver feather bracelet. He held it out to her. "You said this was a lucky charm." Lily smiled, a radiant, beautiful smile. "I told you." "No," Julian said, shaking his head. "It's not the charm that's lucky, Lily. It's the person who wears it." He gently took her hand and fastened the bracelet around her small wrist. It belonged there, and the people who are lucky enough to know her. He then reached back into the bag and pulled out the second silver feather, the one recovered from Robert's car. He held it in his palm. It was identical, yet it felt cold, empty, a symbol of greed and betrayal. He looked at the one on Lily's wrist, warm and alive, a symbol of love and courage, echoing the moment that had started it all. The moment she had held up her drawing to him, he held out the feather. Not for her to take, but for her to see. Proof of their victory. "We did it," he whispered. Lily didn't say anything. She simply launched herself forward, wrapping her small arms around his neck in a tight, fierce hug. And Julian Croft, the man who had forgotten how to feel, hugged her back, burying his face in her hair and finally letting go of the tears he had been holding in for so long. They weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of redemption. The future was still uncertain. There would be trials, headlines, the slow and difficult process of rebuilding his company and his life. But as he knelt on the cold stone of the courthouse plaza, holding the little girl who had taught him the meaning of courage and the true nature of wealth, he knew he would not be doing it alone. The cage had been opened. The bond, once shattered, was now forged into something stronger than steel. It was a promise. It was a family. It was love, unexpected and profound, found at last in the heart of a storm. This story is a powerful reminder that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and that the smallest voice can roar the loudest. Who is an unsung hero in your life who stood by you when things were darkest? Tag them or share their story below, and let's celebrate the fighters and the faithful friends who change our world. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.